7 essential qualities. Okay, let's get the basics right of feedback. Number 1. Okay, so number 1 is about the basics of feedback. Okay, be specific. Have a clear focus on what the feedback is. Okay, base it on fact and not opinion. Okay, so quick example that I always use. Let's say you're in an office environment or a retail environment or whatever it may be, and you have a certain time people have to be in. Let's say it's a 9 to 5 job for argument's sake. Okay, if the standard is 9 o'clock, when you come into work, the standard is 9 o'clock. You need to be, as far as I'm concerned, at your desk, ready to work at 9 o'clock. Not coming in, taking your coat off and everything else. At 9 o'clock, you are working. That is the standard, okay? Now, let's say somebody comes in late 3 times in a week, okay? You need to give them feedback on this because the standard is now being broken. The standards are the same for everybody across the board, okay? So, you can do this objectively and subjectively, okay? You can do it objectively and base it on fact, or you can do it subjectively and base it on opinion. So, at the end of the week, you call that person in objectively and you sit down with them and go, okay, just need a little chat with you. As you know, the start time that we have is 9 a.m. On Monday, you were 7 minutes late. On Wednesday, you were 15 minutes late. And today, you were 10 minutes late. Okay? The standard is 9 o'clock. So the first question is everything okay? Are you finding it difficult to live up to this standard at the moment? What is happening? Can we support you? But we can't let it go because obviously everybody needs to be in at 9 o'clock. So let's find out the reason and see if we can support you and help you moving forward. Okay? Happy days, tick a box. You've done it objectively. People can't argue with that. 7 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. This was the actual time that you came in. Objective feedback, and then you help them move forward, okay? Charlotte's foot takes time to look this good, absolutely. Or you could do it subjectively, where you could call them in on a Friday morning or whatever, get them in, sit them down and go, you're a nightmare, you're always late. That's what subjectively feedback looks like, okay? First of all, the word nightmare, we'll come on to that in a bit, yeah? And always, the term always. The fact is, they're not always late. You know, they were late 3 times this week. They probably came in for 5 days, which meant that we're probably on time for the other 2. So, I know I'm harping on about this point, but the amount of times I see people give feedback and it's not specific. It's opinion. And the moment you start giving feedback based on opinion, people will argue it with you because your opinion will be different to somebody else's opinion. Now, you could use social proof, which for those of you that know, I've done some influencing. Influencing, by the way, is one of the sessions we're going to do in September. There's something called the 6 weapons of influence. Influencing, effective influencing, is something called social proof. So your opinion is in line with lots of people's opinion. That's what social proof is. So you might try and back it up with social proof, but believe me, the best type of feedback is specific and based on fact. It's subjective, it's objective, not subjective. Okay, so that's point number 1, make it specific. Point number 2, make it timely. Give feedback as close to the event as possible, taking into account your emotion. Okay, so sometimes somebody does something and our emotions bubble and explode. That's not the best time to give them the feedback. So you might just have to wait a little bit of time for your chemical to dissipate so you are in a more focused mindset rather than an emotional mindset when you give the feedback. But you shouldn't leave feedback for weeks and weeks and weeks or save it until somebody's review. The amount of times that I see that, yeah, I've got to do their review, won't be very good, I've got loads of hindering feedback I've got to give them. I'm like, well, why are you leaving it to their review? They can't do anything with that information until their review, and if you've saved it up, it's be like a machine gun shooting them, won't it, with bad stuff. Give them feedback as you go in the most timely manner you can, okay? If anybody remembers the behavioural health and safety sessions I did this year, somebody just started recording the meeting. I don't know, I thought it'd been recorded all the way along. If anybody remembers the health and safety sessions that I did this year, the behavioural ones, or it might have even been last year, I can't remember now, it's gone so quick that everything's weird this year. We talked about immediate response to things, and that's what we really need with feedback, unless your chemicals, unless your emotions are too high, but just let them dissipate. Still do it in a timely manner, really important, okay? So specific, timely, meaningful, okay? Content and precision. So make sure whatever you're saying is accurate, okay? I bet there's people on this call that have given feedback in the past and found out afterwards it wasn't accurate. Okay, we've all done it. In fact, you might have found out in the feedback when you were being told something back and the information that you've picked up is not accurate. So make sure that you've got precision and make sure you know what your content is. So what that means when you're giving feedback is a little bit of planning. You need to plan out what you're going to say. You also need to plan out what the goal is, which we'll come on to in a moment, okay? And be candid, honest, be straightforward with people, but do it with kind intent or positive intent. Look, we all know there's a difference between brutal honesty and honesty with kind intent, okay? There are some people that believe in absolute brutal honesty no matter what. And it is honest, it is being honest, but there's also honesty with kind intent, and that's just you thinking about how you're going to approach it and approaching it in the most positive, kind way that you can for the person that's in front of you. So, essential number 1, basics, specific, timely, meaningful, and candid and honest with a kind intent. Okay? Number 2, giving feedback is goal orientated. So, when you're going to give feedback, you need to know what's the goal or output that you're requiring from the feedback. And I did touch on this earlier. Feedback, telling somebody what they've done wrong is useless unless you help them put it right. Okay? And in the feedback session, it should always be ended with kind of a question, which we'll come on to. It's kind of number 7 at the end of this, right? Which is, so how are we going to correct the behaviour going forward? Because nobody's going to like you telling them what they're doing wrong. They will like it more if you help them try and put it right going forward. So before you give feedback, what's the goal of the feedback? Okay? If the goal is so you feel better, that's one of the wrong reasons for giving feedback, remember. That's not a feedback session, that's a I need to feel better so I'm going to shout at you session, yeah? And if there's any parents on the call today, I'm sure you've all done this, yeah? You know, there's been times when you've shouted at your children, whereas actually giving them some more effective feedback would probably have been better, but you felt annoyed at the time, so you've told them off or whatever it may be. It works exactly the same in the commercial arena in businesses, okay? So think about what's the goal and then what's the required change of behaviour going forward. What action needs to be taken on the back of the feedback that you're giving them, because otherwise the feedback is mute. So think about times in your career where you've told somebody 3 times to do something and they're still not doing it. That tells you that the feedback sessions you're doing aren't being effective. They're not effective at the moment. What you're doing is just probably making yourself feel better by giving the feedback. Unless, of course, that person is purposely ignoring your feedback, which of course then is a different conversation at that point. It probably ceases to be a feedback conversation and then maybe turns into a conversation about performance, which again is a different thing. Okay, performance review is very different to giving somebody feedback. We've got a comment from Aaron here. Some people, when getting feedback, go blank, and when asked what they're going to do to change this, can't answer. Always good to have a simple idea that they can develop further. Do you agree? Yes, I do agree, Aaron. I've also got a little tip for you on that as well. So I do agree that if you have a pre-thought out goal about what output or change of behaviour in your head before giving the feedback is useful, because if they do go blank, you can then make some suggestions potentially on how they can correct that going forward. And if they go blank, they've either gone into flight or freeze, by the way, at that point, okay? The other thing to do as well is the only danger if you give somebody advice on how to change their behaviour, it's come from you and not them, so they might be slightly less bought into it. So if they do go blank, or they do stutter, or they can't think, what I would suggest is just suspend the feedback session and ask them a question, which will come on to the end. At the end, a question like, so how could you do things differently going forward? You don't have to answer that right now. Have a think about it, and let's pick it up tomorrow or the day after. What you do at that point is you just take the pressure right off them at that point, and you allow them to go away and have a think about it. You probably allow their emotions to start bubbling down as well rather than up, so you can just take the pressure off, ask them a question, give them a bit of time to think about it, of course, unless it's business or health and safety critical, and then, to be honest, you wouldn't really give people feedback. So if something is business or health and safety critical and somebody's doing something wrong, you don't sit down and give them feedback in a timely manner. Just tell them what to do. So if the fire alarm goes off and somebody goes, oh, do you know what, I know everybody's got to leave the building, but I'm too busy, I'm staying here. Don't sit them down and go, well, how could we correct that behaviour? Because what are all the downsides of that? No. Fire alarm's going off, you get out. Yeah? So you got to, again, there's a time and a place for feedback. Business critical, health and safety critical, no. After the fact, absolutely time for feedback at that point. So yes, Aaron, you can suggest some behaviours to help people move forward, but if you don't want to do that, you can also ask a question and maybe just suspend at that point, let somebody go away and have a think. Hopefully that's useful and answers your question, Aaron. Okay, so number 2, have goals for what you're trying to achieve, not just feedback, but also the behaviour afterwards. Okay? Be specific. Just make sure. Oops, there we go. Yeah. Be specific, as we've already said. Okay. Number 3, effective feedback focuses on the future. And whoever's, you can have some bonus points for whoever tells me what this is. By the way, if you can see it properly. But the point is, it's about the future. Okay. If nobody can guess it, I'll tell you what it is in a moment. Effective feedback focuses on the future, not on the past. So again, this comes in to, I need to give you some feedback because this and this has happened in the past. Thank you, Aaron, it's a flux capacitor, well done, you got a bonus point. This is what we've done in the past, but what are we going to do in the future? That's a key thing to remember with this, okay? Give your feedback. You did X in this situation in the past, it's gone wrong. In the past, we've done X, Y, and Z. In the past, you did this, and this, okay? Then we have to flip it over, okay? So what will we do next time? What's the future focus on this, okay? If you only give feedback and tell them what they've done wrong, and you might sit there and say to myself, yeah, but do you know what? They should know the right way to do it. They've been here long enough. Don't assume that, okay? And standards slip also. If I work for one of you guys and I've done something in the past and it's not been picked up on, and then I've done it again and now you've picked up on it, then there's a precedent been set already in the past. So there's going to be a fight situation there, and there's no good telling me that I shouldn't be doing that, because in my head I'll go, well, yeah, do you know what, they're just not on it this week, I might do it again. So we've got to have that future focus in there. It needs to be in there. What do we need to do differently, okay? Number 4, effective feedback is about the process and not the person. So again, we talked about this right at the beginning. Focus on the behaviour or the fact, not the person or the attitude. Now at this point, let's just stop here for a second, okay? Sometimes we might feel that we need to give feedback on somebody's attitude, okay? Now, I'm not saying no, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do this. However, attitude is subjective, not objective. You can't touch attitude. It's very difficult to measure attitude is. It's normally somebody's opinion. If you see somebody and they do something and you think they've got a poor attitude, it's normally your opinion against their opinion at this point. So what I would urge you to do is, if you are going to give somebody feedback because they need an attitude adjustment, if you like, or you perceive their attitude not to be let's say on the good side of that tree or iceberg, it's on the bad side, and they've got a negative mental attitude, versus somebody like Charlotte that's got a positive mental attitude. If you're going to give feedback on attitude, you try and get as many of your ducks in the row as you can. What I mean by that is try and look at the output of their attitude. Okay, so you can't measure the attitude, but you might be able to try and get some near factual things on the output of their attitude. So let's say you've got a member of the team with a bad attitude. Let's say that attitude has come across to a customer, for argument's sake, okay? And the customer has complained. Then what you need to do is, when you're giving that feedback, you need to go, okay, so we've had this complaint. This is how the customer felt you came across. Okay, this is the felt behavior. So what is it that's causing people to feel that from you? What is it that's driving your current behavior, and how do we help change that moving forward? Okay, so attitude is a more challenging one to give feedback on, but if you can try and find the output of the poor attitude. Okay, you could also try and find the input of the poor attitude. So what is it that's causing your behavior to be the way it is? Because remember, attitude comes out in behavior, yeah? But then this is the output of your behavior. Okay, this is what the customer thinks, this is what the customer feels, this is what your colleague thinks, this is what that department now thinks of you, blah 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 blah. So what is the output, and how do we then change that output, and that will then take you back to the behavioural shift that you're looking for. Okay, so it is doable, a little bit more thinking about it involved. Okay, I like a lot of these things. Sometimes a little bit of 5 minutes of thinking before you do these things just makes them 100 times more effective than if you just kind of go, oh, I've got a bad message to give somebody, let's get them in here and get it over and done with. Yeah, if we can think about these things, it just makes things more effective for not only you as the person delivering the feedback, but also the person receiving the feedback as well. Okay? Focus on the situation, not all. That comes back to using the phrase always and things like that. Don't use words like always and nightmare. Okay, so one thing that we do like to do in our human brains is exaggerate things sometimes. Okay, so try to steer away from exaggeration. It's like the word nightmare, I've mentioned it a few times. Yeah, you might not even call a person a nightmare, but when they come in you can go, look, when you do this it's like a nightmare. Well, it's not a nightmare. There's nobody in cold sweats, there's no zombies, there's no drowning, there's no whatever your nightmares are. So just be aware of the exaggeration we use sometimes when we're giving feedback. And of course, words like always. Well, you always do this. Well, that's a terrible, terrible bit of feedback. Because the likelihood is if they come into work for 100 days and do the thing that you don't want them to do for 99 of those days, and one they didn't, then they haven't always done it. Okay, always is very encompassing. So just bear that in mind when you're giving feedback there, okay? So, and remember, it's about the process, it's not the person. Okay, you can give feedback on attitude, but look for the output of that attitude and then try and work back what the change of behaviour you need, and try and stay away from exaggeration and words like always and nightmare. Okay? People can't change who they are, but they can adapt their behaviour. Okay? So if you go back to all the work that I've done on personality profiling, there are certain types of people, there are certain personalities, and you could argue, can people change who they are? Yes, they can adapt their behaviour. Are you actually going to revert and actually change completely the person you are? It does happen, but in very rare cases, in all honesty. So the point I'm trying to make at here is don't attack the person, attack the behaviour. Because if you attack the behaviour, people can adapt their behaviour. If that person feels like their person has been attacked, there's nowhere for them to go. They can't get out. There's no move for them, but they can adapt behaviour. So go for the behaviour and not for the person. Okay? Number 5. Oh, no, we've got a bit of a ditty here. I know this is wordy, but I put it in because I thought it might work quite well. So praising effort is another easy trap to fall into. You may think that you're making things better by putting a positive spin on the situation, But according to Harveston, complimenting effort after a failure only makes people feel stupid, but also leaves them feeling incapable of reaching their goal. So again, a bit wordy for you. However, what this crap sandwich that I talked about earlier doesn't really work. If anybody's not heard of this crap sandwich before, what it is you get somebody in. You get somebody in to give them some feedback, you give them some good feedback, you give them some crap feedback, you give them some good feedback, and expect them to go and off and be happy because the bad feedback's sandwiched in the middle. Doesn't really work, because people will go into fight, and that emotion is higher than the praise that we give, okay? So if you're going to give somebody some hindering feedback, or challenging is a better word, okay? So I don't like negative and I don't like hindering when it comes to feedback. Maybe challenging feedback, that's okay. Challenging does something different in the brain than negative. Okay, if it's a challenge, the brain starts to look for a route to take the challenge. If it's negative, the brain starts just to go into a negative format. So just bear that in mind as well, okay? So if you're going to give somebody feedback, give them the way it is. But also, we've got to give some praise feedback, which we'll come on to in a moment, okay? Number 5, effective feedback isn't afraid to be challenging. There you go, there's the word challenge, okay? Plan what you're going to say. Keep it simple and direct. Do it regularly and make a habit. In turn, people will respond quicker, better, faster. So when you see feedback, do it in a timely manner, okay? It's like a little guy, if you're having to push that ball up the hill, if you're doing it regularly, they'll keep pushing until you get to the top, and then it starts rolling down that hill, okay? And it's okay that feedback is challenging. Some challenging feedback is some of the best feedback people can have, okay? But the reason that you can make it challenging and not negative is that you tell them what's not right, and then you help them correct the behavior, remember. That's the key thing here, okay? Excuse me. Effective feedback can be positive. So, all the way through the session, we've talked about hindering, challenging, negative feedback. Giving positive feedback is just as important, okay? Celebrate success. You guys know I bang on about this all the time. Give somebody regular feedback for doing a great job, because they need that. It will build them. Likewise, if you give them regular, positive, helpful feedback, it also gives you the ability to give them some challenging feedback when you need to. So it's not about being all happy clappy, everything's wonderful all the time, but notice when people are doing things right, as well as notice when people are doing things wrong, okay? How many people go out in their day and purposely notice people doing things right? Because there are people in the world that will notice how quickly do people pick up on something if you do something wrong. It can be like that, can't they? Oh, they've made a mistake there, blah, blah, blah. Rather than going, do you know what? I'm going to go and notice a few people doing things right today and give them some feedback on it. So there's a little tip. Maybe it's a little action you want to take away for today. Why don't you go away from today and notice people doing something right? Yeah? Mick's put thanks for my email today. Question mark? Not quite sure what you mean there, Mick. Maybe you can tell me in the last minute. The point is, just go and see if you can notice people doing things right for the day. And maybe giving them a bit of positive feedback, okay? Reinforce and promote the good, celebrate success, as I've said. Positive feedback stimulates the reward center of the brain. Makes people feel very, very good when you give them some positive feedback. It stimulates the reward center, the bit that makes it worthwhile, okay? So that's why it's really important. So I wanted to harp on about that for a minute, because obviously we always talk about giving challenging feedback. And the last one, to finish you off today, effective feedback doesn't assume it's right. Don't assume the feedback that you're giving people is correct. You need to make sure it's correct. Okay? Make sure you've got your facts. Check your own ego first. Make sure you're not just thinking you're right. Just because you've done it that way for a long time doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way to do things when you're giving feedback. Check your own emotions are in place, which we've talked about. Earn and trust and respect. If you can get to that level of relationship with somebody, it's easier to give feedback. So we did some positive feedback, only notice when things don't. Positive feedback, only notice when things don't go. Oh right, technology, sorry Mick, right now I've got you, okay great. If you build a relationship with somebody, and on previous sessions we've done relationship building, I think that's already on the YouTube channel. There's 6 levels of relationship: acknowledge, understand, accept, trust, respect, and bond. Okay? If you can get your people to a level of trust and respect, if you've got that deal, if you've got that level of relationship with your team in the workplace, people are more likely to hear you out when you have some challenging feedback. So ultimately, the easiest thing to do, not easiest, the best thing to do in order to be able to give challenging feedback is to build great relationships with people, and do the other 7 points on here, and you'll find that your feedback becomes more effective. And finally, last point before we finish, when you've done the feedback, as Aaron stated earlier on, if that person can't think or freezes at the moment, ask them a question to go away and think about, and the question is, so you've had the feedback, how might you do things differently next time? Remember, how might you do things, not how will you do things. Change of question. One question focuses the mind, the other one engages the imagination. This one, might, engages the imagination. How might you do things differently? Why don't you go and think about that? We'll have a chat about it tomorrow. Okay, so hope you enjoyed that. 7 different things to take away there with giving effective feedback. And remember, maybe today, why don't you go out and look for and try and catch people doing things right and give them a bit of feedback, as well as if you've got to give some challenging feedback, maybe take 1 or 2 of those things away and it'll help you do so. As always, I hope you've enjoyed the session. No worries, thanks Pete. If you've got any feedback, drop it in as always, and I'll see you in 29 minutes if you're on the next session, and that one is about what opportunities we can take and how we take them from the last kind of 10-12 weeks. Bye for now.